stands alone on the Giza Plateau, a silhouette burned so deeply into human consciousness that it feels almost timeless. The Great Pyramid. For most people, it represents the height of ancient Egyptian achievement. A tomb built for Pharaoh Khufu during the 4th dynasty, constructed with organized labor, precise geometry, and careful observation of the stars. A monument to power, belief, and engineering. And all of that is true. But the Great Pyramid is not an ending. It is not a singular event. It is not even uniquely Egyptian. Because once you step back and widen the lens, something unexpected begins to appear. The same shape rises again and again across the ancient world, across oceans, across millennia, across cultures that never met, never traded, never spoke the same language. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats climb upward in stepped terraces, artificial mountains rising from flat river plains. In Mesoamerica, the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan dominates the Valley of Mexico, mirroring the same vertical ambition carved into stone. In Nubia, along the Nile far south of Egypt, slender pyramids mark the tombs of Kushite kings. In China, near the ancient capital of Xi'an, vast burial mounds shaped unmistakably like pyramids rise quietly beneath layers of soil and vegetation. These civilizations were separated by geography, by time, by environment, by belief systems. They worshipped different gods. They developed under entirely different pressures. They had no contact with one another. And yet, when they reached a certain point in their development, they built the same form. Not roughly similar, not vaguely reminiscent, but structurally consistent. Square bases, clear cardinal orientation, monumental scale, a deliberate ascent from earth toward the sky. The usual explanation is simple. A pyramid is stable. It is the most reliable way to build tall using heavy materials and simple tools. Gravity distributes the weight downward. The structure resists collapse. Time does the rest. From an engineering standpoint, the answer is sound. But stability explains survival, not obsession. It explains why pyramids still stand. It does not explain why they were built in the first place. Why align them with such astronomical precision? Why orient them to the cardinal directions within fractions of a degree? Why carve ritual pathways and internal chambers that serve no structural purpose? Why build far larger than necessary, consuming generations of labor for structures that provide no immediate practical benefit? And perhaps most importantly, why does this design appear suddenly, fully formed, at the dawn of organized societies, rather than emerging slowly through trial and error? Pyramids are not merely engineering solutions, they are statements. Across cultures, across continents, they carry the same symbolic weight. Artificial mountains, cosmic centers, fixed points where Earth meets sky. They anchor human life to celestial cycles. They mark authority, permanence, and the boundary between the mortal and the eternal. This is not a story about lost super-civilizations or secret global contact. There is no evidence for that. This is a story about pattern, about a form that keeps reappearing whenever humans reach a certain threshold of organization, belief, and awareness of the cosmos. Tonight, we are not asking how pyramids were built. That question has answers. We are asking something quieter and far more difficult. Why do humans keep building them? Why does this shape emerge again and again when societies become complex enough to think beyond survival? To understand that, we have to move beyond Egypt. Because Egypt is not the beginning of the story. It is only the place where the pattern becomes impossible to ignore. And once you start looking, you realize the pyramid does not belong to one civilization. It belongs to a moment in human development, a moment when societies stop seeing the world only in terms of land, food, and shelter, and begin to see themselves as part of something larger, something measured in time rather than seasons, in stars rather than borders, in memory rather than generations. Before we can understand why pyramids mean what they do, we must first see how far this pattern actually stretches. Because the moment you map them side by side, the mystery stops being architectural and starts becoming human. To understand the pattern, we have to start where most people believe it ends: Egypt. The Giza Plateau holds three massive pyramids aligned along the desert edge like a deliberate statement. The largest of them, the Great Pyramid of Khufu, rises more than 400 feet into the sky. For nearly 4,000 years, it remained the tallest human-made structure on Earth. Its scale alone is difficult to grasp. More than 2 million blocks of limestone, each weighing several tons, precise angles cut into stone. Passageways hidden deep within the structure, sealed and aligned with care. This was not a symbolic gesture built quickly to impress. It was a long-term commitment, one that required planning across decades and coordination across an entire kingdom. The pyramid was not just large, it was exact. Its base is nearly perfectly square. Its sides are oriented toward true north, south, east, and west with astonishing accuracy. Even today, surveyors measure its alignment with respect. This level of precision raises an important point. The pyramid could have been built slightly off-axis and still stood just as firmly for thousands of years. Structural stability does not demand astronomical perfection, yet the builders insisted on it. Why? To the ancient Egyptians, alignment was not decoration, it was meaning. They believed the cosmos itself was ordered. The movement of the sun, the cycling of the stars, the rhythm of seasons. These were not random events. They were expressions of Ma'at, the principle of balance that sustained the universe. The pyramid was built to participate in that order. Its orientation linked the land of the living to the sky of the gods. Its geometry mirrored cosmic harmony. Its permanence reflected the eternal nature of divine rule. Within the pyramid, this logic continues. Narrow shafts extend from the internal chambers, angled with intention. They were once dismissed as ventilation, but their placement tells a different story. Some point toward the region of the sky associated with the imperishable stars, those that never set, circling the north celestial pole. Others align with the path of Orion, a constellation the Egyptians connected with Osiris, god of resurrection. These alignments are not symbolic gestures carved after the fact. They were built into the structure from the beginning. The pyramid was not merely a container for a body, it was a map, a physical expression of how the Egyptians understood existence itself, life and death, earth and sky, time and eternity. And yet, as extraordinary as Egypt's pyramids are, they represent only one expression of a much larger idea. Because while Egypt perfected the smooth-sided pyramid, other civilizations arrived at similar conclusions in their own way. They did not copy Egypt. They arrived at the same form independently. To see this, we have to leave the Nile Valley behind and move east toward the land between two rivers. Because long before Rome, long before Greece, long before Egypt's pyramids reached their final form, another civilization was already building upward. Not toward burial, but toward the gods. In Mesopotamia, the landscape could not have been more different. There were no natural mountains rising from the earth, no stone ridges, no high ground, only flat floodplains stretching to the horizon, shaped and reshaped by the Tigris and Euphrates rivers. And yet, this is where some of the earliest monumental structures in human history rose. The ziggurats. Unlike the pyramids of Egypt, Mesopotamian ziggurats were not tombs. No kings were buried inside them. They were temples, more precisely, artificial mountains constructed where nature had provided none. To the people of Sumer, Akkad, and later Babylon, the world was divided into realms: the heavens above, where the gods dwelled, the earth below, where humans labored, and between them, a fragile connection that had to be maintained. The ziggurat was that connection. Each structure rose in stepped levels, receding as they climbed. Broad platforms at the base supported narrower ones above, drawing the eye upward toward a shrine at the summit. That uppermost chamber was not a public space. It was reserved for the deity of the city, a place where the god could descend and receive offerings. The stairways leading upward were not decorative. They were ritual paths. Processions moved along them during ceremonies, reenacting the journey between earth and sky. In the Sumerian worldview, gods did not dwell permanently among humans. They visited. The ziggurat was built to invite that visit. What matters here is not the difference between pyramids and ziggurats, but the logic they share. Both forms elevate sacred space. Both establish a vertical axis between realms. Both dominate the urban landscape, becoming the focal point around which the city organizes itself. And like the pyramids of Egypt, ziggurats followed strict rules. They were oriented to the cardinal directions. They were constructed according to prescribed proportions. Their placement within the city was deliberate, often aligned with canals, walls, and administrative centers. These were not improvised structures. The ziggurat of Ur, built around 2100 BCE, required tens of thousands of workers, vast quantities of mud brick, and a centralized authority capable of organizing labor, materials, and time across years. And this is crucial. Monumentality in Mesopotamia appears alongside the birth of the city-state itself, not after centuries of experimentation, not as a late cultural flourish. As soon as humans began organizing themselves into large, complex communities, they began building upward. The impulse is immediate. This suggests that monumentality was not a luxury added later. It was foundational. The city was not complete without its artificial mountain. And just like in Egypt, astronomy mattered. Mesopotamian priests were among the earliest astronomers in human history. They tracked the movements of the sun, moon, and planets with careful attention. They recorded eclipses. They mapped the paths of stars. They understood celestial cycles as expressions of divine will. The ziggurat functioned as an observation point, a stable reference for watching the heavens from a fixed position. The sky became legible because the ground was made permanent. Once again, we see the same pattern emerging. A civilization reaches a certain level of organization. It develops centralized authority. It begins to observe the cosmos with regularity. And it expresses those concerns through a monumental structure that rises toward the sky. Egypt did this with stone pyramids. Mesopotamia did it with mud brick ziggurats. Different materials, different gods, same impulse. And this is where the pattern begins to expand beyond the old world. Because if the pyramid-like form were merely a regional tradition, we would expect it to stop here, but it doesn't. To find the next expression, we have to cross an ocean that ancient Mesopotamians never sailed. Across the Atlantic, the pattern reappears. No trade routes connect Mesopotamia to the Americas. No ships cross those oceans in the ancient world. No shared writing systems. No shared gods. No shared technologies. And yet, when complex societies emerged in the New World, they built upward in the same unmistakable way. In the Valley of Mexico, the ancient city of Teotihuacan rose around the first centuries of the Common Era. At its height, it was one of the largest cities on Earth, home to more than 100,000 people. At its center stood two massive structures, the Pyramid of the Sun and the Pyramid of the Moon. The Pyramid of the Sun alone rises more than 200 feet high. Its base covers nearly the same area as the Great Pyramid of Giza. It was not built as a tomb. No royal body lies hidden within its core. Instead, it functioned as a ceremonial and cosmic center, a place where ritual, power, and the heavens intersected. Once again, the rules appear. A square base, monumental scale, deliberate orientation. The pyramid aligns to the movement of the sun, marking specific dates in the calendar. Its position within the city is not accidental. The entire urban grid of Teotihuacan follows a carefully planned layout, angled slightly off true north to match celestial patterns rather than magnetic convenience. This was not symbolic improvisation. It was cosmological planning, and Teotihuacan was not alone. Further south, Throughout the jungles of the Yucatan and Central America, the Maya raised stepped pyramids that dominated their cities. At Tikal, towering temple pyramids rise above the forest canopy like stone mountains. At Chichen Itza, the pyramid known as El Castillo transforms light itself into ritual. During the spring and autumn equinoxes, sunlight casts a moving pattern of shadow along its staircase, forming the image of a serpent descending from the summit. This effect occurs only on those specific days. It requires precise orientation, calculated angles, and exact proportions. Architecture becomes calendar. Stone becomes time. The Maya were extraordinary astronomers. They tracked the movements of the sun, moon, and Venus with remarkable accuracy. Their pyramids served as observation platforms, ritual centers, and physical expressions of cosmic order. Once again, height matters. These structures were far larger than necessary for practical ceremony. A small platform would have sufficed. Instead, entire populations labored for generations to build monuments visible from miles away. Why? Because like the Egyptians and Mesopotamians before them, Mesoamerican civilizations understood the world vertically, the underworld below, the human realm in the middle, the heavens above. The pyramid unified all three. Caves and tunnels beneath some pyramids symbolized the watery underworld. The plaza at the base represented the realm of the living. The summit connected to the sky. Rituals performed at the top were not simply public displays of power. They were acts of cosmic maintenance. Blood offerings, astronomical observations, and seasonal ceremonies were believed to keep the universe in balance. And once again, this architecture appears early. These pyramids do not emerge after centuries of architectural refinement. They appear alongside the rise of the city itself, fully integrated into urban planning and religious life. The pattern is now impossible to dismiss as coincidence. Egypt, Mesopotamia, Mesoamerica, different continents, different materials, different purposes, same form, and the pattern does not stop here. To see its full reach, we have to move even farther east, into a landscape where pyramids were hidden in plain sight for centuries. In East Asia, the pattern takes on a quieter form. There are no towering stone faces catching the desert sun, no stepped terraces cutting through jungle canopies. Instead, the pyramids of ancient China hide beneath the land itself. Near the modern city of Xi'an, scattered across fertile plains and low hills, lie dozens of massive burial mounds. For centuries, they were mistaken for natural formations, gentle rises in the earth shaped by time and vegetation. But they are not natural, they are deliberate. These mounds are royal tombs, constructed between roughly 200 BCE and 200 CE during the Qin and Han dynasties. The largest of them, associated with the first emperor Qin Shi Huang, rises to a height comparable to the Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan. Their geometry is unmistakable. Square bases, flat or gently sloped sides, precise orientation along a north-south axis. The materials are different, packed earth instead of stone, but the form remains. Once again, we see the same rules applied in a culture that developed entirely independently. In ancient China, the emperor was not simply a political ruler. He was the son of heaven. His role was to maintain harmony between the celestial order and the human realm. Natural disasters, famine, and social unrest were interpreted as signs that this balance had been disturbed. The imperial tomb was not merely a place of burial, it was a cosmic anchor. The orientation of these pyramidal mounds followed principles later formalized as feng shui. Cardinal alignment mattered. Landscape placement mattered. The emperor's resting place had to sit correctly within the flow of cosmic forces, ensuring stability not only for the afterlife, but for the empire itself. Inside these burial complexes, entire worlds were recreated. Palaces, courtyards, rivers of mercury meant to mimic flowing water, armies of terracotta soldiers standing in silent formation. The goal was not remembrance alone, it was continuation. The ruler's authority did not end with death. It was preserved, elevated, and stabilized through monumental form. And once again, height plays a central role. Even when covered in soil and softened by vegetation, these pyramidal mounds dominate their surroundings. They rise above the living landscape, marking the presence of power that transcends individual human lives. This choice is telling. China could have buried its emperors underground without marking their tombs at all. Many cultures did exactly that. Instead, the tomb was raised, made visible, aligned, permanent. The dead ruler was lifted above the living world, just as Egyptian pharaohs were, just as Kushite kings were, just as Mesoamerican elites were honored atop stepped pyramids. Different rituals, different cosmologies, same architectural instinct. And now the pattern has completed its circuit. Africa, Mesopotamia, the Americas, East Asia, no contact, no shared technologies, no unified tradition. Yet when societies reached a certain scale, when authority centralized, when cosmic order mattered, when death demanded meaning, they returned to the same solution: a raised geometric mountain, a structure that connects earth and sky. At this point, the pyramid can no longer be explained as a regional curiosity. It is a global phenomenon, and it forces us to confront a deeper question. If pyramids are not the result of contact and not required by engineering necessity, then why does the same form keep emerging? Why does humanity, again and again, choose this shape to express its deepest beliefs? To answer that, we have to stop looking at pyramids as buildings and start looking at them as ideas. At first glance, the answer seems obvious. A pyramid is stable. Its wide base distributes weight evenly. Its sloping sides resist collapse. Gravity itself locks the structure into place. If you want to build something tall with stone, mud brick, or packed earth, the pyramid is an efficient choice. This explanation is repeated so often that it feels definitive. And yet, it only answers half the question. Stability explains why pyramids endure. It does not explain why civilizations chose to build them, because stability alone does not require everything else pyramids possess. A pyramid does not need to be aligned to the cardinal directions to remain standing. It does not need internal passageways angled towards specific stars. It does not need ritual staircases, summit platforms, or ceremonial pathways. It does not need to reach heights far beyond any practical requirement. From a purely functional standpoint, a much smaller structure would suffice. If the goal was simply durability, a low, solid mound would last just as long. If the goal were ritual space, a raised platform would work. If the goal were burial, an underground tomb would be easier to protect. And yet, again and again, ancient societies rejected these simpler options. They chose height. They chose precision. They chose alignment. They chose to build far more than was necessary. This is where the engineering argument begins to falter, because once stability is achieved, everything added beyond that point is a choice. And those choices are consistent across cultures. Consider the base. Nearly every pyramid rests on a square or rectangular foundation, not circular, not oval, not irregular. A circle would be just as stable, perhaps even easier to construct. Nature itself prefers circular forms when materials settle under gravity. But humans chose the square: 4 sides, 4 corners, right angles. This is not a structural requirement. It is a symbolic one. Now consider orientation. Aligning a structure to true north requires careful observation of the sky over long periods of time. It demands patience, record keeping, and specialized knowledge. A pyramid oriented slightly off axis would still stand for thousands of years. Yet builders across the ancient world insisted on precision. Why? Because orientation mattered. It connected the structure to the larger order of the world. It embedded the monument within a cosmic framework that extended beyond human scale. And then there is verticality. A pyramid is not content to sit on the ground. It rises, not gradually, not subtly, but decisively. It asserts itself against the horizon. It dominates the landscape. In flat regions like Mesopotamia, Ziggurats were visible for miles. In dense jungles, Maya pyramids rose above the canopy. In deserts, Egyptian pyramids cast shadows that reshaped the land around them. Height was not a byproduct. It was the point. This obsession with elevation tells us something important. Pyramids are not about shelter. They are not about efficiency. They are not about everyday life. They are about making something visible that would otherwise remain abstract. Authority, order, time, the connection between heaven and earth. These are not practical concerns. They are conceptual ones, which means pyramids cannot be understood as engineering solutions alone. They are physical answers to psychological and cultural questions. And once we see that, the pattern begins to make sense. Because every civilization that built pyramids reached a moment when survival was no longer the only concern. When food production stabilized, when populations grew, when societies began to think in generations rather than seasons. At that moment, new questions emerged. Who holds power and why? How does our society fit into the larger order of the universe? What remains when individuals die? How do we make something that lasts? The pyramid is one way, perhaps the most powerful way, to answer all of those questions at once. But this still leaves one problem unresolved. If pyramids are expressions of belief rather than necessity, why do those beliefs take such a similar form across cultures? Why do humans separated by oceans and centuries choose the same geometry to express them? To answer that, we need to look not at the ground, but at the sky. Because the pyramid is not only anchored to the earth, it is oriented toward the heavens. When ancient builders looked upward, they were not searching for inspiration. They were searching for order. Long before writing, before cities, before agriculture itself, humans watched the sky. They noticed that the sun rose and set in predictable places, that the moon followed a rhythm, that certain stars never disappeared, while others came and went with the seasons. The sky was the first stable system humans ever encountered. On the ground, everything changed. Rivers flooded unpredictably, crops failed, animals migrated, people aged and died. But above, patterns endured. The heavens became the reference point for permanence. And pyramids were built to mirror that permanence on Earth. This is where astronomy enters the story, not as decoration, but as structure. The Great Pyramid's alignment to true north is not a coincidence. Achieving that level of accuracy without modern instruments requires repeated observations of circumpolar stars over long periods of time. It demands institutional memory, knowledge passed from observer to observer, generation to generation. This tells us something crucial. Pyramids were not conceived by individuals. They were conceived by systems, cultures capable of tracking celestial cycles, preserving data, and translating abstract observation into stone had already crossed a cognitive threshold. They were thinking beyond individual lifespans, beyond immediate utility. They were thinking in cosmic time. Inside the Great Pyramid, narrow shafts extend from the inner chambers at precise angles. One points toward the region of the sky associated with Orion, linked to Osiris and rebirth. Another targets the imperishable stars near the north celestial pole, stars that never set, symbols of eternity. These shafts were carved deliberately. They required foresight and planning from the earliest stages of construction. They served no structural purpose. Their function was symbolic and astronomical. They connected the interior of the pyramid to specific regions of the sky, transforming the monument into a three-dimensional cosmological diagram. And this pattern is not unique to Egypt. In Mesoamerica, pyramids functioned as calendars. The Pyramid of the Sun at Teotihuacan aligns with solar events marking agricultural cycles. At Chichen Itza, the play of light and shadow during the equinox creates the illusion of a serpent descending the pyramid's staircase, an effect that occurs only on those specific days. This is not myth layered onto architecture after the fact. It is architecture designed to interact with celestial movement, stone structures that respond to time. The Maya went even further. They tracked Venus with extraordinary precision, recognizing its 8-year cycle and its alternating appearance as morning and evening star. Certain temple pyramids aligned to Venus's extreme rising and setting points, events that occur only at specific intervals. To accomplish this, observations had to be recorded over decades. Patterns had to be recognized across generations. Mathematics had to be developed and preserved. Once again, we see the same convergence. Centralized authority, specialized knowledge, long-term planning. The pyramid becomes the fixed point from which time is measured. It does something remarkable. It takes movement of stars, of sun, of planets, and anchors it to stillness. The sky moves. The pyramid does not. Year after year, light strikes the same edges. Shadows fall along the same angles. Events repeat. The pyramid remembers when humans forget. This is why these structures are built to last. Not only to preserve power, not only to honor the dead, but to serve as reference points in a universe defined by cycles. When a society aligns its most important structure to the heavens, it is making a declaration. We understand where we are in time. We know our place in the cosmos. We can predict the return of light. This knowledge is fragile. If records are lost, if traditions break, if observers die, the sky remains. But interpretation disappears. The pyramid preserves interpretation. It encodes cosmic relationships in stone, making them legible long after the builders are gone. And this leads to a quiet realization. Pyramids are not only monuments to belief. They are instruments. They measure time. They stabilize memory. They fix meaning in a world defined by change. And once we see pyramids this way, their global appearance becomes less mysterious. Any society that begins to measure the sky, centralize power, and think beyond individual lives will eventually seek to anchor those abstractions physically. The pyramid is one answer to that need, but it is not the only possible answer. Which brings us to the final tension. If pyramids encode cosmic order and memory, why do they appear so early, often at the very beginning of civilization, rather than its peak? Why do the largest and most precise pyramids appear before societies reach their highest levels of technological sophistication? To understand that, we need to look at when pyramids emerge in the timeline of human development, not at their symbolism, but at their timing. There is something unsettling about when pyramids appear, not at the end of a civilization's story, not after centuries of refinement and experimentation, but near the beginning. In Egypt, the shift happens with surprising speed. For generations, royal tombs were modest structures made of mud brick. Then, almost abruptly, stone enters the picture. The step pyramid of Djoser rises at Saqqara, not as a tentative experiment, but as a bold declaration. 6 stacked tiers reaching skyward, unlike anything built before. And then, in what feels like the span of a single lifetime, the scale explodes. Sneferu builds 3 pyramids, each one larger, more refined, more ambitious than the last. And then, Khufu's Great Pyramid appears, massive, precise, nearly perfect. This is not gradual progress. It is a leap. There are no long sequences of failed attempts preserved in the archaeological record. No centuries of trial and error leading slowly toward mastery. The knowledge required to build the largest stone structure on Earth seems to arrive almost fully formed. The same pattern repeats elsewhere. In Mesopotamia, the earliest cities already include monumental platforms and temples. Ziggurats rise alongside the first true urban centers, not after a long architectural tradition. Monumentality is present at the birth of the city-state itself. In Mesoamerica, the Olmec construct massive earthen pyramids at La Venta without precedent in the region. Later, Teotihuacan emerges with its pyramids already embedded in the city's layout, as if monumentality was assumed from the beginning. In China, the imperial burial mounds appear early in dynastic history, marking the consolidation of power rather than its mature expression. This timing matters, because building pyramids requires organization, surplus, and specialized knowledge. These are things societies typically develop over time. Yet pyramids often appear before those systems are fully stabilized. This creates a paradox. How do societies build monuments that seem to require maturity before they have matured? One answer is that pyramids are not the result of stability. They are attempts to create it. When societies first organize beyond small communities, they face uncertainty. New hierarchies form. New systems of labor and belief take shape. The future is not yet secure. In moments like this, monumentality becomes a tool. A pyramid does not simply reflect order, it imposes it. It concentrates labor, it defines authority, it anchors belief. By mobilizing thousands toward a single purpose, a society learns how to coordinate itself. Bureaucracy, logistics, specialization. These are not prerequisites for pyramid building. They are consequences of it. The monument teaches the society how to function. This reframes the pyramid entirely. It is not the product of a mature civilization. It is a catalyst for civilization itself. By attempting something far beyond immediate necessity, societies are forced to develop new systems of control, planning, and cooperation. The pyramid becomes a training ground for complexity. But this still does not explain why the form is so consistent. Why this shape? Why this geometry? Why this orientation? If the pyramid is a response to instability, why do different cultures respond in the same way? The answer may lie in how humans understand the world when uncertainty is at its highest. When the future is unclear, when societies are newly formed and fragile, people look for reference points that feel permanent. They look to the sky. They look to geometry. They look to forms that suggest order and endurance. The pyramid answers all three. It is grounded and immovable. It reflects cosmic structure. It promises continuity. In moments of transition, humans do not build modestly. They build decisively. They build something meant to last longer than the chaos surrounding it. This is why pyramids appear at thresholds, at the moment when societies step into something new and untested. They are acts of confidence in the face of uncertainty. Statements that say, "We will endure." And yet, even this explanation leaves something unresolved. Because if pyramids are expressions of early confidence and imposed order, why do later societies rarely build them again? Why do pyramids belong so clearly to beginnings rather than continuations? To answer that, we need to examine what pyramids demand, and what happens once societies move beyond the moment that required them. Once a society survives its moment of uncertainty, something changes. The urgency fades, the need to prove permanence softens, and the pyramid quietly disappears. This is one of the most overlooked patterns in ancient history. Civilizations rarely keep building pyramids forever. Egypt stops. After the Old Kingdom, pyramid construction declines. Middle Kingdom pyramids are smaller, built with inferior materials. By the New Kingdom, pharaohs abandoned pyramids entirely, choosing hidden tombs in the Valley of the Kings. The most powerful period of Egyptian history no longer needs monumental mountains of stone. Mesopotamia stops. Ziggurats cease to be built once empires stabilize and administrative systems mature. Temples become more elaborate, cities more complex, but the great artificial mountains no longer dominate the landscape in the same way. Mesoamerica slows. Later civilizations continue to build pyramids, but often as restorations or ritual renewals rather than radical new constructions. The initial explosive monumentality gives way to repetition, refinement, symbolism without escalation. China stops. Imperial burial mounds remain, but their prominence fades as political philosophy shifts toward Confucian bureaucracy and written law. Authority becomes embedded in systems rather than stone. This pattern suggests something crucial. Pyramids are not a default expression of power. They are a response to a specific phase of development. When societies are young, fragile, and uncertain, power must be visible. It must be undeniable. It must be embedded into the landscape itself. Once authority becomes abstract, encoded in law, writing, administration, and institutions, the pyramid is no longer necessary. Power no longer needs to shout. It can whisper through systems. The pyramid is blunt. It says, this is permanent, this is order, this is who we are. But mature civilizations don't need to say this so loudly. They enforce order through rules, not monuments. They preserve memory through texts, not stone mountains. They manage time through calendars, not alignments carved into bedrock. The pyramid belongs to a moment where none of that yet exists. It is architecture doing the work that institutions have not yet learned how to do. This also explains why pyramids are so resource-intensive. They are inefficient by design. A pyramid consumes labor, stone, and time at a scale that would be reckless for a stable society. But for a society in transition, that inefficiency is the point. It absorbs surplus energy. It unifies competing groups under a single project. It redirects chaos into structure. In this sense, pyramids function almost like cultural shock absorbers. They take the volatile energy of early civilization and channel it into something immobile, controlled, and symbolic. But there is another layer to this pattern. Because pyramids don't just disappear when societies stabilize, they are actively replaced. As writing systems become dominant, memory moves from stone to text. As astronomy becomes codified, observation moves from architecture to instruments. As authority becomes bureaucratic, power moves from monuments to laws. Stone gives way to symbols. Mass gives way to meaning. The pyramid is heavy because it has to be. It exists in a world where abstraction is not yet trusted. In early civilizations, ideas alone are not enough. Belief must be reinforced physically. Authority must be visible. Order must be immovable. The pyramid satisfies all of this. But once societies learn to trust systems instead of stone, the need for pyramids fades. Which raises a final question. If pyramids emerge at the threshold of civilization and disappear once systems mature, what exactly are they marking? The answer may be simpler and more unsettling than it first appears. Pyramids mark the moment when humans stop merely living in the world and begin trying to control it. They are not celebrations of dominance. They are safeguards against uncertainty, an understanding that changes how we see them forever. To understand why pyramids mark this turning point, we have to look beyond architecture. We have to look at the human mind. Early humans lived inside nature. They adapted to it, reacted to it, feared it. Floods, droughts, eclipses, earthquakes. These were not abstract events. They were forces that arrived without warning and left devastation behind. For most of human existence, the world was something that happened to us. Civilization changes that relationship. Agriculture creates predictability. Calendars emerge. Storage allows planning beyond the next season. For the first time, humans begin to believe that the world can be managed. But belief alone is fragile. Early civilizations are unstable precisely because they are new. Social hierarchies are untested. Religious systems are still forming. Political authority has not yet proven itself across generations. In that environment, uncertainty is dangerous. So societies externalize control. They take ideas, order, permanence, divine legitimacy, and turn them into matter, stone, weight, geometry. The pyramid is the physical manifestation of psychological reassurance. It tells everyone who sees it that chaos has been contained, that the gods are aligned, that time is understood, that death has been accounted for. This is why pyramids are not subtle. They are deliberately overwhelming. They dwarf the human body. They dominate the horizon. They reshape entire landscapes. Standing before a pyramid, an individual feels small, and that is intentional. Smallness produces submission. Submission produces stability. But this is not merely political. It is existential. The pyramid reassures people that their suffering has meaning, that their labor contributes to something enduring, that their ruler is not just powerful, but cosmically sanctioned. When you help build a pyramid, you are not just stacking stones, you are participating in the maintenance of reality. This explains why pyramid labor is so often framed as ritual rather than coercion. In Egypt, workers were fed, housed, and commemorated. In Mesoamerica, construction was tied to religious festivals. In Mesopotamia, temple labor was a sacred duty. These societies were not simply forcing people to work. They were giving them a role in something larger than themselves. The pyramid transforms anxiety into purpose, fear into structure, mortality into legacy, and this psychological function helps explain why pyramids emerge independently. Because the fear they address is universal. Every society that reaches a certain size must confront the same problem. How do you convince thousands or millions of people that the world makes sense? That their place within it is secure? That tomorrow will resemble today? Words are not enough. Texts can be challenged, laws can be ignored, leaders can be questioned. But stone does not argue. A pyramid simply exists. And in its existence, it asserts inevitability. This is why pyramids often coincide with periods of ideological consolidation, moments when religions formalize, when kings claim divine descent, when cosmologies become fixed. The pyramid freezes belief. It locks a worldview into the landscape. But here's the paradox. The very success of this strategy makes it obsolete. Once belief becomes stable, once systems take root, once authority no longer needs constant reinforcement, the pyramid becomes unnecessary, too expensive, too inflexible, too blunt. Civilizations evolve beyond it. They trade stone for symbols, monuments for laws, alignment for abstraction. And yet, the impulse never truly disappears. It simply changes form. To see where it goes next, we need to follow that impulse forward in time, past pyramids, past temples, past stone, and watch how humanity continues to externalize its need for order and permanence. Because the pyramid is not the end of the story, it is the first chapter. After pyramids fade from the landscape, the impulse that created them does not disappear. It evolves. When societies no longer need stone mountains to assert order, they begin building something lighter, but no less powerful. They build systems. Writing replaces mass. Law replaces monument. Institutions replace alignment. In Egypt, once pyramids stop rising, temples expand. Karnak, Luxor, Abu Simbel. These are not mountains, but they still overwhelm. They still impose scale. They still anchor belief. But instead of pointing upward, they extend outward. Power becomes immersive rather than singular. In Mesopotamia, administration overtakes architecture. Clay tablets multiply. Bureaucracy spreads. The city becomes the monument. Order is no longer centered in one structure. It permeates daily life. In China, the shift is philosophical. Confucianism reframes authority away from divine spectacle and toward moral hierarchy. The emperor remains the axis of the cosmos, but that axis is now maintained through ritual, law, and social obligation rather than massive stone forms. In Mesoamerica, pyramids persist longer, but their meaning shifts. Later constructions emphasize ritual repetition rather than escalation. They become stages for reenactment rather than declarations of first principles. Across cultures, the same transition occurs. The need to impose order remains, but the method changes. Early civilizations carve certainty into stone because abstraction is not yet trusted. Later societies trust symbols, texts, and institutions to do the same work. The pyramid is heavy because it must be undeniable. Systems are lighter because belief has stabilized. This transition reveals something important about human development. The pyramid is not the height of civilization. It is its proof of concept. Once societies learn that order can be maintained without constant physical reinforcement, monumentality becomes optional. Power migrates from landscapes into minds, but the instinct to externalize meaning never disappears. It simply seeks new materials. Cathedrals replace pyramids in medieval Europe. Their spires still point upward. Their floor plans still encode cosmic symbolism. Their construction still spans generations. Different theology, same impulse. Later, nation-states build capitals. Massive government buildings are lined along grand axes. Monumental architecture re-emerges whenever authority feels threatened or needs reinforcement. Even today, skyscrapers dominate skylines not because they are efficient, but because they communicate power, permanence, and control. The shape changes. The function does not. The pyramid is simply the earliest and most concentrated expression of this instinct. It is humanity's first attempt to freeze meaning into matter at civilizational scale. And this brings us to a final realization. The pyramid does not belong to the past. It belongs to a recurring moment. Whenever societies feel the ground shifting beneath them, politically, spiritually, existentially, they reach for architecture that reassures, dominates, and endures. Stone today, steel tomorrow, data next. Different materials, same fear, same response. The pyramid teaches us something uncomfortable. That beneath our technologies, beneath our philosophies, beneath our progress, the human need for certainty remains unchanged. We still build to feel safe. We still measure ourselves against the sky. We still want something to outlast us. The pyramid was simply the first time we made that desire immovable. There is a reason pyramids appear at the moment when societies first become aware of themselves as civilizations. Not tribes, not villages, but something larger, abstract, continuous. Before pyramids, humans live inside time. After pyramids, humans try to master it. Early societies experience time as seasonal and cyclical. Crops grow, animals migrate, people are born and die, memory is oral, history lives in stories that fade and mutate. Nothing feels permanent. The pyramid is the first attempt to step outside that cycle. It is not built for the living, it is built for the future, for people not yet born, for eyes that will look back and know someone was here. This is why pyramids feel different from other ancient structures. A house serves the present. A fort serves immediate danger. A road serves movement. But a pyramid serves witnesses. It assumes observers across centuries. That assumption alone reveals a radical psychological shift. To build a pyramid, a society must believe two things at once: that it will end and that something will remain. This is not optimism. It is existential awareness. The builders knew their world was temporary. Dynasties collapse. Names fade. Languages die. And yet, they still committed immense resources to permanence. This is not denial of death. It is confrontation with it. The pyramid stands as a negotiation between human finitude and cosmic indifference. A statement that says, we know we will vanish, but we refuse to vanish without a trace. This is why pyramids are often associated with rulers. Not because rulers were uniquely arrogant, but because rulers embodied continuity. A king or emperor is not just a person. He is an institution compressed into flesh. His death threatens disorder. His burial must therefore stabilize reality itself. The pyramid transforms a fragile body into a fixed point. The ruler becomes landscape. This is also why pyramids demand extreme precision. Imprecision implies decay. Approximation implies error. Error implies entropy. By aligning structures perfectly to cardinal directions and celestial cycles, builders symbolically remove them from human messiness. They anchor them to laws that do not change. The stars do not argue. The sun does not forget. The heavens do not decay. To align with the sky is to borrow its permanence. This psychological logic explains something crucial: why pyramids are overbuilt, why they exceed practical needs, why they are bigger, heavier, and more precise than required. They are not optimized for use. They are optimized for meaning, and meaning, to early civilizations, required excess. Excess signals seriousness. A modest structure can be dismissed. A massive one cannot. A pyramid dominates not just the land, but the imagination. It teaches obedience without words. It teaches hierarchy without explanation. It teaches eternity without theology. Children grow up under its shadow. Travelers see it from miles away. Generations internalize its presence as natural, unquestionable. This is how belief becomes infrastructure. The pyramid is not propaganda in the modern sense. It is pre-propaganda, a reality-shaping object. Once built, it changes how people think, what they expect, what they accept as normal. A world with pyramids feels ordered. A world without them feels unstable. This effect is not accidental. It is the point. And this reveals why pyramids appear early and then disappear. Once belief systems mature, once authority becomes internalized through law, ritual, and identity, stone mountains are no longer necessary. People carry the pyramid inside their minds. But at the beginning, when belief is fragile, when order is new, when the future is uncertain, stone must speak louder than words. That is when pyramids rise. Memory is fragile. Before writing, memory lives in people. Before monuments, memory dies with them. Pyramids change that equation. They are memory made physical. In early civilizations, forgetting was a constant threat. Oral histories warped, genealogies blurred, myths fractured with every retelling. Authority depended on remembrance, but remembrance depended on fragile human minds. The pyramid solves this problem brutally and elegantly. It does not tell a story. It does not explain itself. It simply exists, and existence is harder to erase than words. A pyramid does not need to be understood to be remembered. Its scale forces attention. Its geometry resists reinterpretation. Its presence imposes itself on landscape and consciousness alike. This is why pyramids rarely contain detailed inscriptions explaining their meaning. They don't need to. Meaning emerges from endurance. A structure that outlives generations becomes sacred by default, not because of theology, but because persistence itself inspires reverence. People begin to ask, who built this? Why is it still here? What kind of power creates something that refuses to disappear? Over time, these questions crystallize into belief. This is the mechanics of myth formation. The pyramid becomes a reference point around which stories orbit. Gods, kings, cosmic events, origins. These narratives attach themselves to the structure not because the structure demands them, but because humans need explanations for permanence. In this way, pyramids do not just preserve memory, they generate it. Each generation adds interpretation. Each culture layer leaves its mark, but the core remains unchanged. Stone does not argue. Stone does not correct. Stone allows myths to accumulate without contradiction. This is why pyramids are perfect myth engines. They do not constrain belief. They absorb it. Now consider shape. Why this shape specifically? Why not obelisks? Why not domes? Why not irregular mountains of stone? The pyramid is the most legible shape humans ever created. From any angle, it communicates the same message: upward, centered, stable. There is no confusion about its intent. A pyramid has no front or back in the psychological sense. It does not face outward like a statue. It does not invite entry like a temple. It simply asserts itself. This makes it uniquely powerful as a symbol of authority. Authority works best when it appears inevitable, not argued, not defended, just present. The pyramid embodies inevitability. It looks like it has always been there and always will be. Even when newly built, it feels ancient. Even when damaged, it feels permanent. This illusion is critical, because early civilizations were anything but stable. They faced drought, famine, disease, rebellion, invasion. Political structures were fragile. Borders shifted. Leadership was contested. The pyramid countered this instability psychologically. It told people, order exists. Hierarchy is natural. The world has a center. Even if daily life contradicted this message, the structure did not. And because it did not change, people adjusted their beliefs around it rather than question it. This is how architecture becomes ideology, not through persuasion, but through presence. Look at where pyramids are placed. They are never hidden. They dominate plains, valleys, city centers. They are placed where they cannot be ignored. This is deliberate. A pyramid does not function if it is unseen. Its purpose is not secrecy, it is visibility. This is why pyramids are often isolated, separated from dense habitation. The space around them magnifies their impact. Nothing competes with them visually. They stand alone, like concepts, like laws, like gods. This spatial isolation amplifies their psychological weight. The approach becomes ritualized. Distance builds anticipation. Size grows slowly as one moves closer, reinforcing awe. This is not accidental design. It is environmental psychology. The builders understood, intuitively or explicitly, that humans respond to scale, symmetry, and dominance. The pyramid uses all three, and once established, it becomes self-reinforcing. Later rulers align themselves with existing pyramids. Later temples orient toward them. Cities grow around them. The structure becomes the axis of meaning, not because it explains the world, but because it outlasts it. This is why pyramids often survive cultural collapse. Empires fall, religions change, languages vanish, but the pyramid remains, stripped of its original context, yet still commanding reverence. New meanings replace old ones, but the shape continues to function. This is the deepest secret of the pyramid. It does not belong to a belief system. Belief systems belong to it. Time is the true adversary of civilization, not enemies, not famine, not disaster. Time erases everything eventually. Languages drift until they fracture. Traditions lose meaning. Symbols detach from their origins. Even gods change names and faces. Most human structures accept this. Pyramids do not. They are built as if time itself is the opponent. This is why pyramids are so heavily tied to cycles. Solar cycles, stellar cycles, dynastic cycles, life and death cycles. They do not mark random moments, they mark repeating ones. A solstice returns every year. An equinox never forgets its date. The stars wheel back to familiar positions over generations. By aligning pyramids to these cycles, ancient societies anchored themselves to rhythms larger than history. History is messy, cycles are reliable. This distinction mattered deeply to early civilizations. Kings could lie, chronicles could be altered, victories could be exaggerated, but the sun never misses its rising point. By encoding architecture into astronomical repetition, pyramids became validators of truth. If the light hits here on this day, order still exists. This is why so many pyramids function as calendars without words. At Chichen Itza, the serpent descends every equinox, regardless of who rules the city. At Giza, the alignment to the cardinal directions does not shift when dynasties collapse. At Chinese burial mounds, the north-south axis remains fixed, even as empires rise and fall. The pyramid does not care who is in power. It cares about alignment. This gives it an authority that outlasts politics. It becomes a witness, a neutral observer of history, and that changes how societies relate to time itself. Instead of seeing time as linear and irreversible, pyramid-building cultures increasingly saw it as cyclical and correctable. If cycles return, order can be restored. If the sun rises again at the same point, chaos is temporary. If the stars return to familiar positions, decline is not final. This worldview is subtle but powerful. It allows civilizations to endure collapse psychologically, even when they cannot prevent it materially. The pyramid stands through disaster and silently says, "This has happened before. It will happen again, and order will return." This belief is not superstition, it is cognitive resilience. Now consider where pyramids sit in the landscape. They are often placed at geographical centers, river bends, valley mouths, or artificially created focal points. These are liminal spaces, boundaries between regions, transitions between environments, points of convergence. The pyramid marks these spaces as fixed reference points in an otherwise shifting world. Floodplains change, forests recede, cities expand and contract, but the pyramid remains. It becomes a geographic anchor, People orient themselves around it, measure distance from it, define territory in relation to it. Time and space collapse into a single point. This is why pyramids are often described as world centers in mythology. Not metaphorically, functionally. They become 0 points. Everything is before or after, near or far, aligned or misaligned. Without maps or clocks, this matters enormously. The pyramid becomes the society's coordinate system, and this brings us to an overlooked truth. Pyramids are conservative structures, not politically, ontologically. They resist change. Once built, they freeze a worldview into stone. Later generations inherit not just the monument, but the assumptions embedded within it. The idea that order comes from alignment, that authority is vertical, that permanence is achievable, that time can be mastered. Even when beliefs shift, these assumptions linger. This is why pyramids continue to influence cultures long after their original meaning is forgotten. They normalize hierarchy, they normalize scale, they normalize cosmic thinking. A child raised under a pyramid grows up in a world where immense permanence is normal, where authority feels natural, where the sky feels connected to power. This is subtle conditioning across centuries. And it works. Because stone is patient. It does not persuade. It waits. Power does not begin with force. It begins with perception. Before laws are written, before armies march, before borders are drawn, power establishes itself by shaping how reality feels. Pyramids excel at this. They do not command. They do not threaten. They do not explain. They simply exist. And in existing, they redefine scale. Stand next to a pyramid and your body understands something before your mind does. You are small. Time is large. Something here will outlast you. This realization is not taught. It is felt. That is the genius of pyramid architecture. It bypasses language entirely. Early civilizations did not rely on mass literacy. They relied on shared experience. And nothing creates shared experience like monumentality. When thousands of people work for years on a single structure, the structure becomes more than stone. It becomes collective memory. Every block carries labor. Every layer carries sacrifice. Every ascent carries meaning. People internalize the idea that some things are worth more than individual lives. That is how authority stabilizes. Not through fear, but through inevitability. The pyramid looks inevitable. It feels as though it could not be otherwise. And that feeling matters, because once people accept that something had to be built, they begin to accept that other structures of power are also unavoidable. Hierarchy feels natural. Obedience feels rational. Sacrifice feels meaningful. This is not manipulation in the modern sense. It is psychological architecture. Now consider how pyramids are approached. They are not hidden. They are not subtle. They dominate sightlines. Cities are often organized so the pyramid is visible from great distances. Roads lead toward it. Ceremonies culminate at it. The pyramid becomes the visual conclusion of movement. Wherever you go, your path eventually resolves into it. This creates a powerful cognitive loop. Movement implies purpose. Purpose implies order. Order implies legitimacy. Even if you never enter the pyramid, even if you never understand its rituals, you feel that the world makes sense because the pyramid exists. This is why pyramids rarely require explanation. They do not persuade through argument. They persuade through presence, and presence is harder to challenge than ideas. Ideas can be debated, stone cannot. This brings us to an uncomfortable realization. Pyramids are not democratic structures. They cannot be. Their construction requires centralized decision-making. Their symbolism reinforces vertical authority. Their scale privileges permanence over adaptability. Yet they appear precisely at moments when societies transition away from small egalitarian groups towards stratified systems. This is not coincidence. The pyramid is the architectural announcement of inequality made sacred. Not crude inequality, cosmic inequality. The ruler is closer to the sky. The elite ascend. The masses remain below. But this hierarchy is justified not by violence, but by cosmology. The ruler does not dominate because he is stronger. He dominates because he is aligned. Aligned with the heavens, aligned with time, aligned with order. The pyramid makes this believable, and belief is more durable than force. Once internalized, people police themselves. They accept roles. They reproduce the system. They teach it to their children, all because a structure stands there, silently validating the worldview. This explains why pyramid cultures invest so heavily in ritual. Ritual keeps the structure alive psychologically. Processions, sacrifices, festivals, alignments. These are not extras. They are maintenance. Without ritual, the pyramid becomes inert stone. With ritual, it becomes active meaning. And importantly, rituals always involve ascent, climbing steps, approaching summits, moving upward towards something restricted. Not everyone reaches the top, and that exclusion reinforces status. The pyramid does not need guards. Its design enforces access naturally. Height is privilege. This is universal across pyramid cultures. Egyptian priests, Mesoamerican elites, Mesopotamian clergy, Chinese imperial rites, different gods, same choreography. Upward movement equals authority. Downward space equals labor. Now ask yourself something difficult. If pyramids are so psychologically powerful, why did civilizations stop building them? The answer is not technological, it is ideological. When belief systems change, pyramids lose their function. Once authority is justified by law rather than cosmology, once legitimacy comes from text rather than alignment, once power becomes mobile rather than monumental, the pyramid becomes obsolete. You cannot debate a pyramid, but you also cannot update it. It is fixed, and fixed authority eventually becomes fragile. Later civilizations favor cathedrals, palaces, parliaments, structures that can be reinterpreted, expanded, repurposed. The pyramid resists reinterpretation. It says one thing very clearly, and once people stop believing that thing, it becomes a relic, still imposing, still impressive, but no longer active. Yet even today, thousands of years later, pyramids continue to exert influence. They draw attention. They command silence. They resist dismissal. We still argue about them, still film them, still project meaning onto them. That is their final power. They outlast belief systems themselves. They become mirrors. Whatever we think civilization is, we see reflected in them. And that reflection is never neutral. Pyramids are not built for the people who construct them. They are built for people who will come later. This is easy to forget because we imagine ancient builders focused on their own rulers, their own gods, their own era. But the scale of a pyramid betrays a different intention. Nothing that massive is meant to be temporary. Nothing that precise is meant to be forgotten. Pyramids are messages sent forward in time. They speak across centuries without using words. Think about how most human creations age. Wood rots, metal corrodes, texts burn or decay. Languages evolve until inscriptions become unreadable. Civilizations vanish quietly. But pyramids resist this erasure. They are built from stone not because stone is convenient, but because stone remembers. Even broken, even stripped of casing, even eroded by wind and sand, the core remains legible. A pyramid does not need translation. You do not have to understand its builders to recognize its intention. It says, someone was here and they mattered. This is the concept of deep time made architectural. Most societies think in generations. Pyramids think in millennia. To commit to such a structure requires a particular kind of imagination, an imagination capable of picturing a future without oneself. The builders knew they would never see the pyramid completed. They knew they would not be remembered individually. Their names would not be carved into stone, yet they built anyway. That tells us something profound. The pyramid is not about personal legacy. It is about continuity. It assumes the future exists. It assumes observers will come. It assumes meaning will survive. That assumption is not trivial. It emerges only when societies become conscious of history itself. Not just stories, not just myths, but long, irreversible time. When humans first realize that their present will one day become someone else's past, they begin to care about what remains. Pyramids are born at that moment. This explains why they appear alongside early writing systems. Writing preserves thought. Pyramids preserve presence. One records memory symbolically. The other records it physically. Together, they create history. But there is something else embedded in pyramid design that reinforces this future orientation. Standardization. Pyramids are not chaotic. They follow ratios. Angles repeat. Proportions remain consistent. This suggests that builders expected comparison. They expected future eyes to measure, to notice, to recognize order. A random mound erodes into nothing. A geometric form erodes into geometry. Even damaged pyramids still reveal intent. That is by design. And that design choice tells us the builders anticipated decay. They understood erosion. They understood loss. They built not to prevent it, but to survive it. This is subtle, but important. Pyramids do not fight time. They accommodate it. They allow for loss while preserving essence. Smooth casing stones can fall away. Interior chambers can collapse. Ritual practices can be forgotten. But the form remains. The message survives simplification. This is why pyramids feel strangely modern. Not because they are advanced, but because they think the way we do when we archive, when we back up data, when we compress files, when we choose formats that can survive translation. The pyramid is a compressed civilization. Minimal information, maximum durability. Now consider something even more unsettling. Pyramids do not explain themselves. They do not come with instructions. They do not declare purpose. They do not resolve interpretation. This ambiguity is not a flaw. It is a feature. By refusing to explain, pyramids invite projection. Each generation assigns its own meaning. Each culture interprets anew. Tombs, temples, power symbols, calendars, energy centers, philosophical statements. The pyramid absorbs them all, and because it remains physically unchanged, it can host endlessly changing interpretations without contradiction. This makes it the perfect long-term artifact, specific enough to be intentional, abstract enough to remain relevant. Most monuments fail at this. They are too literal, too context-bound, too dependent on language or belief systems that eventually vanish. Pyramids avoid this trap. They communicate through scale, alignment, and silence, qualities that do not expire. This is why pyramids survive not just physically, but culturally. They never finish being understood. And that may have been the point. If you were an ancient ruler or priest, deeply aware that your world was fragile, that floods could come, dynasties could fall, and knowledge could be lost, what would you build? Not a book, not a law, not a palace. You would build something that forces future humans to stop, look, and ask. You would build something that cannot be ignored. You would build something that says, remember that you are not the first. Pyramids are interruptions in time. They break the illusion that the present is permanent. They confront us with the undeniable fact that others once stood where we stand now, with the same fears, the same questions, the same desire to leave something behind. And in that sense, pyramids are not relics of the past. They are mirrors aimed at the future. There is a strange contradiction at the heart of every pyramid. They are impractical. They do not produce food. They do not defend cities. They do not transport goods. They do not heal the sick. By every standard of survival, they are unnecessary. And yet, civilizations that build pyramids seem to believe they cannot exist without them. This tension is revealing, because it tells us pyramids serve a function that does not appear on ledgers or crop tallies. They stabilize meaning. Early civilizations live on the edge of uncertainty. Floods can erase harvests. Droughts can collapse populations. Disease arrives without warning. Political power is fragile. In such a world, survival is not only physical, it is psychological. People need to believe that the chaos around them has limits, that there is structure beneath uncertainty, that someone, somewhere, understands the rules. Pyramids perform this role. They are physical proof that order can be imposed on the world, not temporarily, not locally, but permanently. When a society commits to building something that will outlast storms, rulers, and generations, it sends a powerful signal: we expect to endure. This expectation matters. People behave differently when they believe their society has a future. They invest, they cooperate, they sacrifice short-term comfort for long-term stability. The pyramid makes that future visible. It stands there, day after day, year after year, unchanged. While everything else fluctuates, the pyramid does not. This constancy is not accidental. It is intentional reassurance, and reassurance is a form of control. Not coercive control, existential control. If chaos threatens meaning, pyramids counter it with scale. If time threatens memory, pyramids counter it with mass. If death threatens identity, pyramids counter it with permanence. This explains why pyramids are often associated with crisis points, moments of consolidation, unification, transition. In Egypt, the Great Pyramids follow political unification. In Mesopotamia, ziggurats rise alongside early city-states. In Mesoamerica, pyramids appear as regional power centers form. In China, burial mounds accompany the birth of imperial rule. The pyramid says, "This order is not temporary, even if it is." Now consider the labor involved. Thousands of people working for decades, often without seeing completion, often without personal reward. Why would they accept this? Because pyramids are collective projects. They absorb individual lives into something larger. In building a pyramid, a person becomes part of history, even if unnamed. That matters profoundly in societies where individual identity is fragile. You may not be remembered, but what you build will be. And through it, you persist. This is why pyramids often coexist with strict social hierarchies. They offer meaning in exchange for submission. You give labor, you receive belonging. You give time, you receive continuity. It is a powerful exchange, not cynical, not benevolent, human. But there is another layer to this contradiction. Pyramids are both deeply conservative and radically transformative. Conservative because they fix meaning. They define cosmic order. They declare permanence. Transformative because building them changes society. To build a pyramid, you must invent systems that did not previously exist. You need accounting, scheduling, standardized measurements, logistics, specialized labor, centralized planning. In trying to preserve order, societies are forced to evolve. The pyramid does not simply reflect civilization, it reshapes it. Ironically, the attempt to freeze time accelerates change. This may be why pyramids appear so early. They are catalysts. They force societies to grow into their own ambitions. And once that growth occurs, the pyramid's role changes. It becomes legacy rather than engine. At that point, civilizations often stop building them, not because they cannot, but because they no longer need to. The social machinery the pyramid helped create can now sustain itself through other forms: law, writing, institutions, ideology. The pyramid has done its job. It can stand in silence. So perhaps pyramids are not monuments to gods or kings. Perhaps they are monuments to a moment when humanity first realized that survival alone was not enough. That existence required meaning, that continuity required structure, that memory required stone. And in that realization, we built something impractical, unnecessary, and absolutely essential. There is a moment every civilization reaches, often without realizing it. The gods fall silent. The rituals feel empty. The stories stop convincing. Belief systems change faster than stone ever could. And yet, the pyramids remain. This is where their true nature is revealed. Pyramids do not depend on belief to function. They survive belief. When the Egyptian gods faded, the pyramids did not crumble. When Mesopotamian temples fell into ruin, the ziggurat cores endured. When Mesoamerican religions were dismantled, the pyramids still stood beneath the jungle. When imperial China changed dynasties, burial mounds remained part of the land. The meaning dissolved. The structure did not. This tells us something critical. Pyramids are not religious buildings in the usual sense. They are belief agnostic. They can host gods. They can host kings. They can host theories. They can host silence. Their power does not come from what people think about them. It comes from what they are. Mass, geometry, alignment, time. These things do not require faith. A person who does not believe in Ra can still feel the weight of the Great Pyramid. A person who rejects Maya cosmology can still be unsettled by El Castillo at dusk. A person who knows nothing of Sumerian gods can still recognize the authority embedded in a ziggurat's form. This is why pyramids never become irrelevant. They can lose their explanation and still retain their effect. Most monuments fail here. They are too specific, too tied to symbols that age, too dependent on context. Once belief fades, they become empty shells. Pyramids do the opposite. They grow more mysterious. As original meanings vanish, interpretation opens. The structure becomes a question rather than an answer, and questions endure longer than doctrines. This may explain why modern societies are still drawn to pyramids. Not because we worship ancient gods, not because we believe in divine kingship, but because pyramids bypass ideology and speak directly to perception. They do not argue, they confront, they do not instruct, they assert, they do not explain, they endure. In a world saturated with information, pyramids feel alien. They are silent in an age of noise. They are permanent in an age of constant change. They are indifferent in an era obsessed with relevance. And that indifference is unsettling. It reminds us that human systems come and go, but physical reality is patient. Stone does not care who rules. Geometry does not respond to politics. Time does not negotiate. Pyramids embody this indifference. They are monuments not to belief, but to constraint. They show us what remains when narratives collapse. And this brings us to a final, uncomfortable realization. Pyramids were not built because humans believed they would last forever. They were built because humans feared that nothing else would. The pyramid is not optimism. It is insurance. Insurance against forgetting, against dissolution, against the erasure of meaning. It is the wager that if something must survive, let it be this. Not words, not names, not stories, but form. Because form can be rediscovered even when language is lost. Geometry can be reread. Alignment can be remeasured. Scale can be refelt. A pyramid does not need its builders to explain it. It waits. And when future civilizations encounter it, they will ask the same questions we do. Who built this? Why here? Why this shape? What did they believe? The pyramid ensures that those questions never stop being asked. And as long as questions remain, civilization continues. Even though we no longer build pyramids, we have never truly stopped thinking like them. Their logic quietly migrated. It moved out of stone and into systems. Look at how modern power structures present themselves. Capital cities organize around monumental centers. Financial districts rise vertically. Corporate headquarters stretch upward, narrowing toward the top. Data centers are sealed, massive, windowless, and built to endure. We still associate height with authority, mass with legitimacy, permanence with truth. These associations did not disappear. They were inherited. Modern skyscrapers are not pyramids, but they follow the same psychological grammar. They announce dominance through scale. They compress hierarchy into vertical space. They separate access by elevation. Executives at the top, labor at the base, infrastructure hidden beneath, different materials, Same message. Even our institutions think pyramidal. Organizational charts, command structures, bureaucracies, academic hierarchies. Knowledge ascends, authority narrows, decision-making concentrates. The pyramid is no longer stone. It is abstract, and perhaps more powerful because of it. Consider how we store knowledge today. We no longer carve it into monuments. We archive it. Servers, vaults, backups, redundancies. We choose durability over beauty, stability over accessibility, longevity over flexibility. That is pyramid thinking. We compress enormous value into minimal resilient forms. We assume future observers will exist. We assume translation will be possible. We assume something must survive collapse. These assumptions are ancient. Even national memory follows this pattern. We preserve constitutions, foundational documents, canonical texts. They become untouchable, immutable, revered, critiqued endlessly, yet rarely replaced. These are intellectual pyramids, built at the founding moments of systems, designed to outlast generations, anchored to ideals that may no longer fully apply, yet cannot be discarded. Why? Because they stabilize identity, just like pyramids once did. Now think about space exploration. When humanity first considers leaving Earth, what do we send? Not instructions, not philosophy. We send artifacts, plaques, golden records, images, symbols, messages designed to survive deep time and unknown interpreters. That is pyramid logic applied to the cosmos, minimal, durable, symbolic. We assume whoever finds them may not share our language, beliefs, or biology. So we rely on geometry, mathematics, form. The same tools ancient builders trusted. This continuity is not accidental. It reveals something uncomfortable. Despite our technology, we still fear erasure. Despite our networks, we still crave permanence. Despite our speed, we still want something to stand still. The pyramid satisfies that desire, even when we no longer build it physically. But there is a warning embedded here. Pyramids are excellent at preserving structure. They are terrible at preserving adaptability. They resist change. They lock meaning in place. They outlast the systems they were meant to support. And this can become dangerous. When societies treat institutions as pyramids, immutable and unquestionable, stagnation follows. When authority becomes monumental rather than responsive, collapse becomes inevitable. The ancient world learned this repeatedly. Egypt's later dynasties could not replicate the Pyramid Age. Mesopotamian empires fell and rebuilt endlessly. Mesoamerican cities were abandoned. Chinese dynasties rose and fell beneath the same burial mounds. The pyramids endured. The systems around them did not. This is the paradox. What survives is not what adapts best. It is what resists change most effectively. Stone beats flesh. Form beats belief. Mass beats meaning. So the question for us is not why ancient people built pyramids. It is why we keep rebuilding their logic in new forms. Perhaps the pyramid is not an artifact of the past. Perhaps it is a recurring instinct. One that emerges whenever humans feel the ground shifting beneath them. Whenever the future feels uncertain. Whenever permanence feels threatened. We stop experimenting. We start monumentalizing. We try to freeze something. And history suggests that this instinct is both understandable and dangerous. At the end of all this, the pyramid does not ask us to believe anything. It asks us to notice. Notice how often humans, separated by oceans and millennia, reached for the same shape when faced with the same questions. Notice how order becomes architecture, how fear becomes geometry, how mortality becomes stone. The pyramid is not proof of secret knowledge, not evidence of lost civilizations, not a riddle waiting for a dramatic solution. It is quieter than that. It is a record of a moment. The moment when humanity first realized that survival was not enough. That food and shelter did not answer the deeper unease. That meaning needed form. That time needed markers. That death needed resistance. And so we built upward, not because the sky demanded it, but because we did. across deserts and jungles, across rivers and plains, across belief systems that no longer exist. We built the same answer in different languages, stone by stone, step by step, and then we moved on. Civilizations fell. Gods were forgotten. Empires dissolved into dust. But the pyramids remained, not as messages with fixed meanings, but as questions that refuse to disappear. They remind us that every society believes itself to be permanent until it isn't. That every system assumes it has solved the problem of order until time proves otherwise. The pyramid stands there, unmoved by these assumptions, patient, unimpressed. It does not care who explains it. It does not care who claims it. It does not care who argues about it. It simply waits. And in that waiting, it reveals something uncomfortable. That no matter how advanced we become, no matter how fast our world moves, no matter how much we believe we've outgrown the past, we are still asking the same questions. How do we make meaning last? How do we leave something behind? How do we resist being forgotten? The pyramid does not answer these questions. It shows us that they are older than civilization itself, and that every time humanity reaches a certain point, we try to answer them the same way, by building something that says, "We were here," not loudly, not violently, not temporarily, but in a form that time itself must acknowledge. As you drift toward rest, let the pyramids do what they have always done best. Not teach, not persuade, but remind that you are part of a long story, that others stood where you stand. That meaning is something we build, even knowing it will one day erode, and that sometimes the most human thing we can do is leave a shape behind and trust the future to wonder why. Rest well. The stones are still watching, and the story continues.